What makes someone's life go best? What would be best for someone, or would be most in this person's interests, or would make this person's life go for him as well as possible? Answers to this question I call theories about self-interest. There are three kinds of theory. On hedonistic theories, what would be best for someone is what would make his life happiest. On desire fulfillment theories, what would be best for someone is what, throughout his life, would best fulfill his desires. On objective list theories, certain things are good or bad for us, whether or not we want to have the good things or to avoid the bad things. Narrow hedonists assume, falsely, that pleasure and pain are two distinctive kinds of experience. Compare the pleasures of satisfying an intense thirst or lust, listening to music, solving an intellectual problem, reading a tragedy, and knowing that one's child was happy. These various experiences do not contain any distinctive common quality. What pains and pleasures have in common are their relations to our desires. On the use of pain, which has rational and moral significance, all pains are, when experienced, unwanted, and a pain is worse or greater the more it is unwanted. Similarly, all pleasures are, when experienced, wanted, and they are better or greater the more they are wanted. These are the claims of preference hedonism. On this view, one of two experiences is more pleasant if it is preferred. The theory need not follow the ordinary uses of the words pain and pleasure. Suppose that I could go to a party to enjoy the various pleasures of eating, drinking, laughing, dancing, and talking to my friends. I could instead stay at home and read King Lear. Knowing what both alternatives would be like, I prefer to read King Lear. It extends the ordinary use to say that this would give me more pleasure. But on preference hedonism, if we add some further assumptions given below, reading King Lear would give me a better evening. Griffin cites a more extreme case. Near the end of his life, Freud refused pain-killing drugs, preferring to think in torment than to be confusedly euphoric. Of these two mental states, euphoria is more pleasant. But on preference hedonism, thinking in torment was, for Freud, a better mental state. It is clearer here not to stretch the meaning of the word pleasant. A preference hedonist should merely claim that, since Freud preferred to think clearly in torment, his life went better if it went as he preferred. Consider next desire fulfillment theories. The simplest is the unrestricted theory. This claims that what is best for someone is what will fulfill all his desires throughout his life. Suppose that I meet a stranger who has what is believed to be a fatal disease. My sympathy is aroused, and I strongly want this stranger to be cured. We never meet again. Later, unknown to me, this stranger is cured. On the unrestricted desire fulfillment theory, this event is good for me and makes my life go better. This is not plausible. We should reject this theory. Another theory appeals only to our desires about our own lives. I call this the success theory. This theory differs from preference hedonism in only one way. The success theory appeals to all of our preferences about our own lives. A preference hedonist appeals only to preferences about those features of our lives that are introspectively discernible. Suppose that I strongly want not to be deceived by other people. On preference hedonism, it will be better for me if I believe that I am not deceived. It will be irrelevant if my belief is false, since this makes no difference to my state of mind. On the success theory, it will be worse for me if my belief is false. I have a strong desire about my own life, that I should not be deceived in this way. It is bad for me if this desire is not fulfilled, even if I falsely believe that it is. When this theory appeals only to desires that are about our own lives, it may be unclear what this excludes. Suppose that I want my life to be such that all of my desires, whatever their objects, are fulfilled. This may seem to make the success theory, when applied to me, coincide with the unrestricted desire fulfillment theory. But a success theorist should claim that this desire is not really about my own life. This is like the distinction between a real change in some object and a so-called Cambridge change. An object undergoes a Cambridge change if there is any change in the true statements that can be made about this object. Suppose that I cut my cheek while shaving. This causes a real change in me. It also causes a change in Confucius. It becomes true of Confucius that he lived on a planet on which later one more cheek was cut. This is merely a Cambridge change. Suppose that I am in exile and cannot communicate with my children. I want their lives to go well. I might claim that I want to live the life of someone whose children's lives go well. A success theorist should again claim that this is not really a desire about my own life. If unknown to me, one of my children is killed by an avalanche, this is not bad for me and does not make my life go worse. A success theory would count some similar desires. Suppose that I try to give my children a good start in life. I try to give them the right education, good habits, and psychological strength. Once again, I am now in exile, and I shall never learn what happens to my children. Suppose that, unknown to me, my children's lives go badly. One finds that the education that I gave him makes him unemployable. Another has a mental breakdown. Another becomes a petty thief. If my children's lives fail in these ways, and these failures are in part the result of mistakes I made as their parent, these failures in my children's lives would be judged on the success theory to be bad for me. One of my strongest desires was to be a successful parent. What is now happening to my children, though it is unknown to me, shows that this desire is not fulfilled. My life failed in one of the ways in which I most wanted it to succeed. Though I do not know this fact, it is bad for me. It makes it true that I have had a worse life. This is like the case where I strongly want not to be deceived. Even if I never know, it is bad for me both if I am deceived and if I turn out to be an unsuccessful parent. These are not introspectively discernible differences in my conscious life. So, on preference hedonism, these events are not bad for me. But on the success theory, they are. Consider next the desires that some people have about what happens after they are dead. For a preference hedonist, once I am dead, nothing bad can happen to me. A success theorist should deny this. Return to the case where all my children have wretched lives because of the mistakes I made as their parent. Suppose that my children's lives all go badly only after I am dead. My life turns out to have been a failure in one of the ways I cared about most. A success theorist should claim that here, too, this makes it true that I had a worse life. Some success theorists would reject this claim, since they tell us to ignore the desires of the dead. But suppose that I was asked, do you want it to be true, even after you are dead? that you were a successful parent? I would answer yes. It is irrelevant to my desire whether it is fulfilled before or after I am dead. These success theorists count it as bad for me if my attempts fail, even if, because I am in exile, I never know this. How then can it matter whether, when my attempts fail, I am dead? All that my death does is to ensure that I will never know this. If we think it irrelevant that I never know about the non-fulfillment of my desires, we cannot defensively claim that my death makes a difference. I turn now to questions and objections which arise for both preference hedonism and the success theory. Should we appeal only to the desires and preferences that someone actually has? Return to my choice between going to a party or staying at home to read King Lear. Suppose that, knowing what both alternatives would be like, I choose to stay home. And suppose that I never later regret this choice. On one theory, this shows that staying at home to read King Lear gave me a better evening. This is a mistake. It might be true that, if I had chosen to go to the party, I would never have regretted that choice. According to this theory, this would have shown that going to the party gave me a better evening. This theory thus implies that each alternative would have been better than the other. Since this theory implies such contradictions, it must be revised. The obvious revision is to appeal not only to my actual preferences in the alternative I choose, but also to the preferences that I would have had if I had chosen otherwise. In this example, whichever alternative I choose, I would never regret this choice. If this is true, can we still claim that one of the alternatives would give me a better evening? On some theories, when in two alternatives I would have such contrary preferences, neither alternative is better or worse for me. This is not plausible when one of my contrary preferences would have been much stronger. Suppose that, if I choose to go to the party, I shall be only mildly glad that I made this choice, but that, if I choose to stay and read King Lear, I shall be very glad. If this is true, reading King Lear gives me a better evening. Whether we appeal to the preference hedonism or the success theory, we should not appeal only to the desires or preferences that I actually have. We should also appeal to the desires and preferences that I would have had in the various alternatives that were, at different times, open to me. One of these alternatives would be best for me if it is the one in which I would have the strongest desires and preferences filled. This allows us to claim that some alternative life would have been better for me, even if throughout my actual life, I am glad that I chose this life rather than this alternative. There is another distinction which applies both to preference hedonism and to the success theory. These theories are summative if they appeal to all of someone's desires, actual and hypothetical, about either his states of mind or his life. In deciding which alternative would produce the greatest total net sum of desire fulfillment, we assign some positive number to each desire that is fulfilled, and some negative number to each desire that is not filled. How great these numbers are depends on the intensity of the desires in question. In the case of the success theory, which appeals to past desires, it may also depend on how long these desires were had. As I suggest in Chapter 8, this may be a weakness in this theory. The issue does not arise for preference hedonism, which appeals only to the desires that we have at different times about our present states of mind. The total net sum of desire fulfillment is the sum of the positive numbers minus the negative numbers. Provided that we can compare the relative strength of different desires, this calculation could, in theory, be performed. The choice of a unit for the numbers makes no difference to the result. Another version of both theories does not appeal in this way to all of a person's desires and preferences about his own life. It appeals only to global rather than local desires and preferences. A preference is global if it is about some part of one's life considered as a whole, or is about one's whole life. The global versions of these theories I believe to be more plausible. Consider this example. Knowing that you accept a summative theory, I tell you that I am about to make your life go better. I shall inject you with an addictive drug. From now on, you will wake each morning with an extremely strong desire to have another injection of this drug. Having this desire will be in itself neither pleasant nor painful. But if the desire is not fulfilled within an hour, it will then become very painful. This is no cause for concern, since I shall give you ample supplies of this drug. Every morning, you will be able at once to fulfill this desire. The injection and its after effects would also be neither pleasant nor unpleasant. You will spend the rest of your days as you do now. What would the summative theories apply about this case? We can plausibly suppose that you would not welcome my proposal. You can prefer not to become addicted to this drug, even though I assure you that you will never lack supplies. We can also plausibly suppose that, if I go ahead, you will always regret that you became addicted to this drug. But it is likely that your initial desire not to become addicted, and your later regrets that you did, would not be as strong as the desires you have each morning for another injection. Given the facts as I described them, your reason to prefer not to become addicted would not be very strong. You might dislike the thought of being addicted to anything, and you would regret the minor inconvenience that would be involved in remembering always to carry with you sufficient supplies. But these desires might be far weaker than the desires you have each morning for a fresh injection. On the summative theories, if I make you an addict, I will be increasing the sum total of your desire fulfillment. I will be causing one of your desires not to be fulfilled, your desire not to become an addict, which, after my act, becomes a desire to be cured. But I will also be giving you an indefinite series of extremely strong desires, one each morning, all of which you can fulfill. The fulfillment of all these desires could outweigh the non-fulfillment of your desires not to become an addict and to be cured. On the summative theories, by making you an addict, I will be benefiting you, making your life go better. This conclusion is not plausible. Having these desires and having them fulfilled are neither pleasant nor painful. We need not be hedonists to believe more plausibly that it is in no way better for you to have and to fulfill this series of strong desires. Could the summative theories be revised so as to meet this objection? Is there some feature of the addictive desires which would justify the claim that we should ignore them when we calculate the sum total of your desire fulfillment? We might claim that they can be ignored because they are desires that you would prefer not to have. But this is not an acceptable revision. Suppose that you are in great pain. You now have a very strong desire not to be in the state that you are in. On our revised theory, a desire does not count if you would prefer not to have this desire. This must apply to your intense desire not to be in the state you are in. You would prefer not to have this desire. If you did not dislike the state you are in, it would not be painful. Since our revised theory does not count desires that you would prefer not to have, it implies absurdly that it cannot be bad for you to be in great pain. There may be other revisions which could meet these objections, but it is simpler to appeal to the global versions of both the success theory and preference hedonism. These appeal only to someone's desires about some part of his life, considered as a whole, or about his whole life. The global theories give us the right answer in the case where I make you an addict. You would prefer not to become addicted, and you would later prefer to cease to be addicted. These are the only preferences to which the global theories appeal. They ignore your particular desires each morning for a fresh injection, since you have already considered these desires in forming your global preference. This imagined case of addiction is in its essentials similar to countless other cases. There are countless cases in which it is true both 1. That if someone's life went in one of 2 ways, this would produce a greater sum total of local desire fulfillment, but 2. That the other alternative is what he would globally prefer, whichever way his actual life went. Rather than describing another of the countless actual cases, I shall mention an imaginary case. This is the analog within one life of the repugnant conclusion that I discussed in Part 4. Suppose that I could either have 50 years of life of an extremely high quality, or an indefinite number of years that are barely worth living. In the first alternative, my 50 years would, on any theory, go extremely well. I would be very happy, would achieve great things, do much good, and love and be loved by many people. In the second alternative, my life would always be, though not by much, worth living. There would be nothing bad about this life, and it would each day contain a few small pleasures. On the summative theories, if the second life was long enough, it would be better for me. In each day within this life, I have some desires about my life that are fulfilled. In the 50 years of the first alternative, there would be a very great sum of local desire fulfillment, but this would be a finite sum. And in the end, it would be outweighed by the sum of desire fulfillment in my indefinitely long second alternative. A simpler way to put this is this. The first alternative would be good. In the second alternative, since my life is worth living, living each extra day is good for me. If we merely add together whatever is good for me, some number of these extra days would produce the greatest total sum. I do not believe that the second alternative would give me a better life. I therefore reject the summative theories. It is likely that, in both alternatives, I would globally prefer the first. Since the global theories would then imply that the first alternative gives me a better life, these theories seem to me more plausible. Turn now to the third kind of theory that I mentioned, the objective list theory. According to this theory, certain things are good or bad for people, whether or not these people would want to have the good things or to avoid the bad things. The good things might include moral goodness, the development of one's abilities, rational activity, having children and being a good parent, knowledge, and the awareness of true beauty. The bad things might include being betrayed, manipulated, slandered, deceived, being deprived of dignity or liberty, and enjoying either sadistic pleasure or aesthetic pleasure in what is in fact ugly. An objective list theorist might claim that his theory coincides with the global version of the success theory. On this theory, what would make my life go best depends on what I would prefer, now and in the various alternatives, if I knew all of the relevant facts about these alternatives. An objective list theorist might say that the most relevant facts are those just mentioned, the facts about what would be good or bad for me. And he might claim that anyone who knew these facts would want what is good for him, and want to avoid what would be bad for him. Even if this was true, though the objective list theory would coincide with the success theory, the theories would remain distinct. A success theorist would reject this description of the coincidence. On his theory, nothing is good or bad for people, whatever their preferences are. Something is bad for someone only when, if he knew the facts, he would want to avoid it. And the relevant facts do not include the alleged facts cited by the objective list theorist. On the success theory, it is, for instance, bad for a person to be deceived if and because this is not what this person wants. The objective list theorist makes the reverse claim. People want not to be deceived because this is bad for them. As these remarks imply, there is one important difference between, on the one hand, preference hedonism and success theory, and on the other hand, the objective list theory. The first two kinds of theory give an account of self-interest which is purely descriptive, which does not appeal to facts about value. This account appeals only to what a person does and would prefer, given full knowledge of the purely non-evaluative facts about the alternative. In contrast, the objective list theory appeals directly to what it claims to be facts about value. In choosing between these theories, we must decide how much weight to give to imagined cases, in which someone's fully informed preferences would be bizarre. If we can appeal to these cases, they cast doubt on both preference hedonism and the success theory. Consider the man that Rawls imagined who wants to spend his life counting the numbers of blades of grass in different lawns. Suppose that this man knows that he could achieve great progress if instead he worked in some especially useful part of applied mathematics. Though he could achieve such significant results, he prefers to go on counting blades of grass. On the success theory, if we allow this theory to cover all imaginable cases, it could be better for this person if he counted his blades of grass, rather than achieving great and useful mathematical results. The counterexample might be more offensive. Suppose that what would someone most prefer, knowing the alternatives, is a life in which, without being detected, he causes as much pain as he can to other people. On the success theory, if he is undetected, such a life would be what is best for this person. We may be unable to accept these conclusions. Ought we therefore to abandon this theory? This is what Sidgwick did, though those who quote him seldom notice this. He suggests that a man's future good on the whole is what he would now desire and seek on the whole, if all the consequences of all the different lines of conduct open to him were accurately foreseen and accurately realized in imagination at the present point of time. As he comments, the notion of good thus attained has an ideal element. It is something that is not always actually desired and aimed at by human beings. But the ideal element is entirely interpretable in terms of fact, actual or hypothetical, and does not introduce any judgment of value. Sidgwick then rejects this account, claiming that what is ultimately good for someone is what this person would desire if his desires were in harmony with reason. This last phrase is needed, Sidgwick thought, to exclude the cases where someone's desires are irrational. He assumes that there are some things that we have good reason to desire, and others that we have good reason not to desire. These might be the things which are held by the objective list theories to be good or bad for us. Suppose we agree that, in some imagined cases, what someone would most want, both now and later, fully knowing about the alternatives, would not be what would be best for him. If we accept this conclusion, it may seem that we must reject both preference hedonism and the success theory. Perhaps, like Sidgwick, we must put constraints on what can be rationally desired. It might be claimed instead that we can dismiss the appeal to such imagined cases. It might be claimed that what people would in fact prefer, if they knew the relevant facts, would always be something that we could accept as what is really good for them. Is this a good reply? If we agree that in the imagined cases, what someone would prefer might be something that is bad for him, in these cases, we have abandoned our theory. If this is so, can we defend our theory by saying that, in the actual cases, it would not go astray? I believe that this is not an adequate defense, but I shall not pursue this objection here. This objection may apply with less force to preference hedonism. On this theory, what can be good or bad for someone can only be discernible features of his conscious life. These are the features that, at the time, he either wants or does not want. I asked above whether it is bad for people to be deceived because they prefer not to be, or whether they prefer not to be deceived because this is bad for them. Consider the comparable question with respect to pain. Some have claimed that pain is intrinsically bad, and that this is why we dislike it. As I have suggested, I doubt this claim. After taking certain kinds of drug, people claim that the quality of their sensations has not altered, but they no longer dislike these sensations. We would regard such drugs as effective analgesics. This suggests that the badness of a pain consists in its being disliked, in that it is not disliked because it is bad. The disagreement between these views would need much more discussion, but if the second view is better, it is more plausible to claim that whatever someone wants or does not want to experience, however bizarre we find his desires, should be counted as being for this person truly pleasant or painful, and as being for that reason good or bad for him. There may still be cases where it is plausible to claim that it would be bad for someone if he enjoyed certain kinds of experience. This might be claimed, for instance, about sadistic pleasure, but there may be few such cases. If instead we appeal to the success theory, we are not concerned only with the experienced quality of our conscious life. We are concerned with such things as whether we are achieving what we are trying to achieve, whether we are being deceived, and the like. When considering this theory, we can often more plausibly claim that, even if someone knew the facts, his preferences might go astray and fail to correspond to what would be good or bad for him. Which of these different theories should we ultimately accept? I shall not attempt an answer here, but I shall end by mentioning another theory, which might be claimed to combine what is plausible in these conflicting theories. It is a striking fact that those who have addressed this question have disagreed so fundamentally. Many philosophers have been convinced hedonists, while many others have been as much convinced that hedonism is a gross mistake. Some hedonists have reached their view as follows. They consider an opposing view such as that which claims that what is good for someone is to have knowledge, to engage in rational activity, or to be aware of true beauty. These hedonist asks, would these states of mind be good if they brought no enjoyment, and if the person in these states of mind had not the slightest desire that they continue? Since they answer no, they conclude that the value of these states of mind must lie in their being liked, and in their arousing a desire that they continue. This reasoning assumes that the value of a whole is just the sum of the value of its parts. If we remove the part to which the hedonist appeals, what is left seems to have no value. Hence hedonism is the truth. Suppose instead, more plausibly, that the value of a whole may not be the mere sum of the value of its parts. We might then claim that what is best for people is a composite. It is not just their being in the conscious states that they want to be in, nor is it just their having knowledge, engaging in rational activity, being aware of true beauty, and the like. What is claimed, what is good for someone, is neither just what hedonists claim, nor just what is claimed by objectivist theorists. We might believe that if he had either of these without the other, what we had would have little or no value. We might claim, for example, that what is good or bad for someone is to have knowledge, to be engaged in rational activity, to experience mutual love, and to be aware of true beauty, while strongly wanting just these things. On this view, each side in this disagreement, saw only half the truth. Each put forward as sufficient something that was only necessary. Pleasure, with many other kinds of object, has no value. And if they are entirely devoid of pleasure, there is no value in knowledge, rational activity, love, or the awareness of beauty. What is of value, or is good for someone, is to have both, to be engaged in these activities, and to be strongly wanting to be so engaged.